so that if there ever was a successful cyber attack, a data breach, a security event, or both, that the consequences of that attack would be significantly less and significantly different. We are in the middle of a cyber pandemic. It's impacting organizations from enterprise, mid-market, small, medium businesses, all over the world, domestic, international, public sector, private sector. Nobody is escaping this cyber pandemic. But before you lose hope, there is hope. And hope is in the form of what I'm calling managed services immunity. And before we get too far into it, managed services immunity has the ability to dramatically change the trajectory of this cyber pandemic and may very well end up being the difference between success and failure. Stick around. Okay. Managed services immunity. You might be saying, what the heck is that? It sounds something, like out of a movie. Is it a shot? Is it a pill? How do you get it? I'm going to talk about all of that. But first, I need to kind of lay the groundwork for where this is coming from, because it's happening in a couple of different areas, in the United States. And I think that from there, it's going to spread rather quickly to other jurisdictions throughout the world pretty quickly. Simply put, managed services immunity is the concept that a managed service provider can impact in a positive way their customers, so that if there ever was a successful cyber attack, a data breach, a security event, or both, that the consequences of that attack would be significantly less and significantly different than if no immunity from the MSP existed at all. So now you're probably really scratching your head saying, okay, what are we talking about here? I'm going to break it down, make it really, really simple to understand. Okay. So we all know that there has been, for probably a decade or more, a steady march of public policy, regulation, laws being written and passed that generally speaking deal with what happens when data is breached or lost, compromised, or there's a security event. Someone or something gets access to a server or a laptop or a phone or a router or a firewall, and they're not supposed to have that access, right? Both of those different types of cyber attacks have been happening for decades, but we have slowly been inching our way forward with policy and regulatory and legislative fixes or attempts to deal with that issue. That's what I called in the beginning a cyber pandemic, right? It's the brute force attack from all angles, nation states to private sector, just criminal gangs and just people who are off on their own, just trying to see, hey, can I get this far by breaching into a network, right? They're not really working for anybody except for themselves. And then on the other side, you have MSPs and their customers trying to navigate an incredibly widening, deepening river of complexity, right? Compliance, regulatory, policy, difficulty, right? Having to deal with certain data in certain types of ways. If there was a suspected breach, having to disclose to certain parties that there was a breach, things of that nature. And that has just continued to the point where now there has been so much written, so much said about how we respond to this cyber pandemic that it almost feels like it's not worth fighting, because any misstep, any miscalculation, any successful attack by the bad guys on the good guys is going to nevertheless end up with the good guys getting harmed twice, right? The first harm is the cyber attack itself. And then the second harm is all the regulatory things that they have to do, like data breach notifications, the legal expenses, cyber forensic expenses, the potential for private litigation, the potential for public fines, civil fines, and on and on. But here's the good news. We have started to see the tide change. And there's one example that caught my eye, which was out of Florida, and we wrote a piece about it on MSPalliance.com. I encourage you to go read it. There's a bill. I don't think it has passed yet. I still think that it's pending signature, but I will check on that. And this bill basically said, I'm going to summarize it for you. If you were doing what you were supposed to be doing, meaning you were following proper cyber hygienic practices, it's a very broad term. We'll get into that in a moment. But if you were following proper cyber hygiene and you nevertheless get successfully attacked, we're not going to treat you the same as we did before. We're going to maybe lessen the severity of what you have to do after that breach, meaning we may not have any civil litigation threat looming over your head. You may still have to disclose it, right? I don't think that that's going away, but the threats of fines, the threat of penalties, the threat of private litigation because you are deemed to have done something wrong, that is being corrected by this Florida legislation. And they're not alone. Florida is not the only state that is following this path. There's about 4 or 5 other states that have also moved or are moving in that same direction. And I would classify that as cyber immunity. Okay? I know the topic of this episode is managed services immunity, but what I just described at a state regulatory legislative level is what I think a good term for it is cyber immunity, because what they're saying is you need to be following proper procedure. And if you follow proper procedure, things are going to be a lot better, even if you happen to be the unlucky victim of a cyber attack. So, and this brings up a ton of questions. I know some of you are out there saying, wait a minute, what's proper versus improper cyber hygiene? What's good versus not good? I mean, there's going to be a lot of back and forth about this over the years, trust me. But for the time being, I will accept as a major victory that legislative bodies like the state of Florida and elsewhere are thinking about cyber immunity in this way. So how do we get from cyber immunity to managed services immunity? Well, here's where we get there. If you are following this idea that an organization who is practicing proper cyber hygiene receives cyber immunity by virtue of them getting attacked and not having the severity of repercussions that they normally would, then you have a question of how do you get that cyber immunity to as many organizations as you possibly can? Because we still have a major problem of anybody other than the enterprise who have their own internal IT departments, have very large budgets, have access to tools, have access to people, have access to training, have access to experience, have all of that. And they still get breached successfully. How is a mid-market or a small organization ever going to stand a chance? Well, that's where cyber immunity has to hook up with managed services immunity. Okay? So we already discussed and defined cyber immunity. Now we're going to talk about the application of cyber immunity out into the very hard to reach parts of the world. Small organizations, mid-market organizations, public sector, private sector, doesn't matter. Organizations that just don't have sufficient resources to be able to do the types of things that would demonstrate cyber immunity. They need managed services immunity. That's my term. Managed services immunity, under my definition, would be an MSP helping a customer achieve proper cyber hygiene by doing the things that they need to do. And it's going to be different in every jurisdiction. And that's kind of a bad thing for the time being, but stick with me for this. The MSP is going to help their customer achieve proper cyber hygiene so that if they are ever breached, they ever have a data event or a security event, they will have that immunity from their MSP. That's all managed services immunity is. Okay? It's the MSP helping the customer organization become cyber hygienic so that the organization, the end user customer organization, can benefit from that immunity in the case of a data or security event. Now, I'll say this, the law, it's not a law yet, the bills that I've been reading don't mention MSPs, but they don't exclude them either. So I suspect that over time, and it's not going to take that much time, we are going to start to see very definite guidance of what is proper cyber hygiene and what isn't, right? Automatically, I can tell you, right? We're not going to be in a situation where if you're a small organization and you think, well, I don't have any money to back up my data or use MFA or have a password manager, I don't think that that's going to be very successful of an argument at all. Because there is very, very, very little in terms of technology or IT service that is unavailable to even the smallest of organizations out there in the world. You know, it used to be that we can't afford an RMM. 30 years ago, an RMM was really expensive to buy. So what, they cost $250,000. In the mid 90s, what chance did a small organization ever have of being able to, figure out what their the network was looking like? Well, with the advent of the RMM vendors, that changed. A couple of years later, it became, backup. It used to be only the big enterprise folks, only they would be able to really afford an ongoing, very comprehensive, secure backup and restoration technology array. But we had a very, very successful campaign in the MSP sector, right around the 2007, 2008 onward timeframe, where a ton of money was invested in equipping MSPs and their customers with backup. And then it used to be password management. And then the same thing happened, right? We solved that problem. And the most recent security solution that was previously only something for the enterprise class, but now is firmly filtering down successfully to the mid-market and SMB, and that would be XDR or MDR, EDR technologies and services that now are completely affordable, completely available to organizations of all sizes, so that you can, I just don't think that there's anything really that is out there that is completely just only being used at the enterprise level that is not accessible to the mid-market and SMB. I'm sure there might be. If you guys think of something, mention in the comments or shoot me an email. But I don't think there's a lot. If there is anything, it's not a lot. So the fundamentals, that's the important thing. The fundamentals, the availability of this technology to be able to demonstrate by putting this technology into effect, right? Having the MSP have access to an RMM, a backup tool, a password management tool, an EDR tool, a ticketing system, right? All the stuff. To be able to leverage all of those tools together and deliver a suite of services to a customer who could never do this on their own, for them to achieve managed services immunity from their MSP, so that if that small organization ever were to successfully suffer a cyber attack, they would be in a far better position and they would be treated far better in that situation than if they said, you know what, I don't really care about backing up my data. You know what, I really don't care about using multi-factor. I really find it inconvenient for me to have to pay to have my data encrypted, and so on and so on. I think that this is personally a really, really profound moment in the history of managed services, because for legislative bodies like the state of Florida to be moving in this direction and to be saying, we are going to start to provide incentives, and that's how I view this bill. Hopefully it becomes law. This bill is a huge incentive for proper cyber hygiene, good cyber behavior. That's what we want, right? We have known what we need to do. We've known that for decades. Now we have incentives to do the good stuff, to do the right thing. I think the last 30 years could probably be described in summary as, we know what we need to do, but a fair number of us don't want to pay to do it. Therefore, we're going to play a waiting game and see how lucky can we be not being cyber hygienic, right? Maybe it would be like, I'm not going to wear my seatbelt when I get in the car, or maybe I'm not going to wear a helmet when I get on a bicycle, or any other type of risky behavior. It's risky, and people do it anyway. Because they think, maybe it's not going to happen to me, but eventually it does, and the consequences can be really severe. And I think now we have no doubt in anyone's mind. I don't think, at least. There's no doubt in anyone's mind today that the consequences of a successful cyber event on your organization can be catastrophic. For most, it's something that you don't ever recover from. But I think that this cyber immunity legislation that we're seeing from multiple states is the beginning of a rapid turnaround in a new direction that will incent MSPs to finally be able to say to customers, look, there's a reason that it has nothing to do with our sales messaging to you. There's finally a reason for you to do all the things that we've been suggesting you do. And that is, your state law now finally says, if you follow good cyber hygiene, you're going to be okay. You're going to be better than if you had not followed proper cyber hygiene. That's my definition of managed services immunity. This is not something that, I know I keep saying this like a broken record. Managed services immunity is not something that you can get or inherit from a break-fix reactive company. Just not even close. So this type of public policy legislation is going to have another, multiple unintended side effects, if you want to call it that. Further encouragement of reactive-minded companies to get out of that mindset and finally fully embrace, never looking back, fully embrace managed services as a proactive IT, cyber hygienic model of IT service management. So we'll keep an eye on this, and this is going to be a very, very big topic of discussion at MSP World Inspire. I already know it, because already a lot of the members in the Inspire peer group and elsewhere who have heard about this, they are very excited about the prospects of being able to have this type of legislation helping them to convince as many people as they can of what they should and should not be doing. So I encourage you, if you haven't already, register, go to msplines.com, register for MSP World. You won't regret it. It'll be a fantastic several days in Las Vegas. What's not to like about Las Vegas? But more importantly, you're going to meet some fantastic MSPs. You're going to hear some absolutely riveting conversations you won't hear at any other MSP conference. I guarantee you that. So be safe, be cyber hygienic, Get your managed services immunity today.